Good morning, everybody. We've got a tremendous panel to discuss the question about how to scale up and finance learning. I think every word in that title is very carefully chosen. So this is going to be about scaling up, it is going to be about finance, and it is going to be about learning. And unlike many panels that we have at Brookings, this one is actually completely comprised of practitioners. So I am actually very pleased we have people who have actually been trying to apply some of these ideas on the ground. Immediately to my left, Charles Ahito-Sega. Sorry if I am... Deputy Director General for Quality and Access of the Ghana Education Service. First, I think it's tremendous that you've actually got a unit which is called Quality and Access. I'm not sure of many countries that have done that. But Charles has been working in education for over a quarter of a century. And in addition to his practical teaching, headmasterships, etc., he's also serves on the board of directors of the Financial Advisory Committee of EFA FTI. Is that right? Great. GPE. Claudia Costin is the Secretary of Education of the Municipality of Rio de Janeiro. Rio is known for many things. In addition to Carnival and the World Cup, Rio also traditionally is known for its favelas. And how one deals with marginalized communities, the favelas of the slums of Rio, how one deals with people who are traditionally very difficult to reach has been a long-standing issue. And Dr. Costin has been really driving an effort to try to reach that. So I think that that's particularly relevant to the notion of scaling up. Dr. Zbigniew Marciniak has spearheaded reforms in Poland that have achieved extraordinary improvements in PISA scores. He has done that while still, I believe, Poland spends a fraction of the amount of money of other OECD countries on its education. There were a series of very important institutional reforms that were done. So there's been a great focus, I think, on quality of learning. He also chairs the Governmental Committee on the Implementation of the European Qualification Framework. And last, by no means least, at the far end, Shannon May, welcome again, Shannon, thank you for giving us so much of your time, is the co-founder of Bridge International Academies, which is the largest chain of private schools in Africa. Bridge International has an extraordinary business model which is providing learning to primary school at a price point of $4.5 to $7 per month. So Shannon brings a business orientation of how to scale up schooling, and I believe is now opening something like two schools per week? One school every 2.5 weeks.
2.5 days.
Days. More than 2 schools per week. I'm always behind the times on these things. So it's a terrific panel. I'll start. Actually, let me start by saying there are 3 things that I think everybody should know as background to this panel. The first is that in the context of the post-2015 agenda, the UN launched a large online survey called My World to ask people about their priorities for development. It currently has something like 1.5 million responses, and education is far and away the highest priority in the responses received. So just to reinforce Rebecca's earlier comment that everybody believes that education is critical, education is one of the most important things. That's true not just of policymakers, that's also true of people in developing countries. Second, the fact that education's share of total aid is falling. Total aid to education in 2012, Lisbeth was just showing me the numbers, 13.6 billion US dollars. That's somewhere around $20 per year per kid. If you were to take just basic education, the number falls to $5.4 billion, so less than $10 per year per kid. These are really quite small numbers. I'm also struck by the fact that within aid, one would expect the strongest arguments to be for the funding of basic education, but seemingly the allocations and the moves are more towards upper secondary and private and higher education, where the private benefits tend to be larger. So another issue is within education, where does the money go? And then the last point I wanted to emphasize is the issue of learning. Something like 250 million kids can't read, write, do basic sums. That's obviously a tragedy, but I think what's absolutely unforgivable is that 130 million, just over half of these kids, have spent 4 years in school. There is no point of being in school if you do not actually learn. So we have to figure out how to translate the dollars into more dollars and the more dollars into more learning. Charles, let me start with you and start with this question of finance, which has always been one of the toughest challenges, I would say, for scaling up. So, you know, you've had quite a bit of success in Ghana. Tell us about what arguments you found in the ministry to be most persuasive in actually getting increases in your budget. Did you have to use learning results? If so, how did you get the learning results before you got the money, or did you get the money first? Tell us a bit just about the politics of getting finance.
Right. Thank you very much, and good morning to everyone here. For us in Ghana, the arguments for financing has essentially been around the issue of the number of children that should be educated. We have quite a very large young population, many of whom should be in school, and therefore immediately when you look at that huge population, the argument is that, yes, let's put money at the point where the largest group of our growing population would be in school, and that is targeting children at the very foundation of learning. And here, of course, the issues about population distribution becomes a critical condition for as one of the things for making that argument. And you referred to the issue about learning. Rightly, we build a learning and we want to build a literate and numerate population in Ghana. And the ultimate goal is that we want a very functioning citizenry that can participate in the process of governance. Therefore, the issues about learning outcomes then become a critical component of the argument for all this large number of children who we advocate to get access to education. And so we make that point, and we use the challenges that we encounter in terms of getting the real numbers, in terms of showing learning to be one of the reasons why we still need some resources to be able to deliver. And I'm happy you mentioned the challenges with literacy, numeracy, which in my earlier discussion is now a global problem. We have that in great proportion in Ghana. So we use all of those arguments to be able to make the case for financing education in Ghana.
So let me push you on that. Do you use international testing? Do you use local testing? Do you look at averages across the country? Do you look at specific communities?
We use a mix of all of that. We use local testing, we use international testing, and for those who have been following TIMSS, we have been in TIMSS, and we are always very proud that the very year that we entered TIMSS, we knocked South Africa to the bottom. And South Africa was so upset, so they left TIMSS, and because South Africa left TIMSS, Ghana was left behind, and so we perpetually sat at the bottom of that order of merit. But again, what was evident for us in doing TIMSS was that in 2007, just barely a year after we had gotten into TIMSS, the report showed that we made a significant improvement in our learning in mathematics and science. So that in itself is one of the critical benefits. We use that. We have local assessments as in what we call the National Education Assessment. Recently, we've introduced early grade reading assessment, and we use all of that and the outcomes of that to make a case, especially for resources for our children. And then we look at the national differentials in terms of learning achievement, and we also use that as a basis to request for resources in order that we can push up the what we in Ghana we refer to as the deprived areas to acquire enough resources to be able to make it up.
Thank you. So, Claudia, I mean, you have been successful in getting more money to favelas. Tell us a bit about, was that difficult? Do you find that by doing that the unit costs go up? Do you find that actually the learning per dollar spent is higher there because you're starting from a different base? How do all of these cost-benefit calculuses change as you go into these communities?
Okay, good morning, everyone, and thank you for the kind invitation from Brookings. First, it's important to understand that Brazil is a federation and the city is independent, including in education. And so when we started, my team started there, we decided to do a system-wide intervention so as to improve the quality of education. Who knows PISA's rankings? Brazil is not performing greatly. We are 58 among 65 countries, although we are progressing at a fast speed in mathematics. Rio was not performing very well either. We had, for example, 28,000 illiterate kids from 4th to 6th grade. Just to explain, we don't have a big issue of out-of-school children, but we have a big issue in learning. Kids are in school, but they are not learning as they should. That was in 2009. So we decided to have a clear curriculum guidelines and to pay better the teachers, to improve teachers' preparation, give them instruments. But at the same time, we were aware that if we did that, not taking a careful look at the most where youths were at risk or the most vulnerable areas, we would be increasing quality just by raising the ones that are, the kids that are already performing well. So we decided to take very quickly 2 approaches on equity. One is early childhood, a huge investment in early childhood, and ensuring that the kids that are below the poverty line have access, are privileged in an affirmative action kind of thing, in getting access to nursery schools and pre-K and K. Second, to choose the 155 schools that we call schools of tomorrow, that are in areas controlled by the drug dealers or the militias, or that have been recently pacified. I left some documents there on the schools of tomorrow. Those schools, we should have the same curriculum, a policy of no excuses, to have a very demanding education, but with additional help. Teachers get paid more, they have better payments, and there is a science program, a very challenging science program inside each classroom. And we started. How did we get additional support for that? Because first we had a supportive mayor that believed that that could be done. Second, there is a process of pacification, if we can make up a word, in Rio going on, making sure that the territories are taken over from the drug dealers. And so that helped also a lot. And as learning outcomes, we had in 2011, there was a national standardized test in all our schools. There is a Brazilian index of quality based on this assessment, that external assessment. And while the municipality of Rio de Janeiro improved its learning outcomes for 9th grade in 22%, while the country stagnated in 9th grade, in the schools of tomorrow, the improvements were 33%, which means that although they haven't reached the learning outcomes of their colleagues, but they approach it a lot. So we were able to give learning for all and diminishing inequality.
Thank you. You talked about 155 schools. Is that all of the schools? Did you decide that you had to do this program immediately with a coverage of everything? Why didn't you start with 5 schools as a pilot, which would have been, let's say, a World Bank strategy, and then evaluate it, and then decide on some success, and 50 years later move on?
Okay. We are not a research center. We are dealing with public policy. This is what I always tell researchers. And first, we have 1,075 schools, but most of them are not in violent surroundings. Rio de Janeiro is not only about drugs and militias. So do visit there. It's a wonderful place. So we decided not to choose, take the 155 schools that are in violent surroundings. And just to do some commercials, 2 of them were ranked among the best performing schools in the country. Yeah. After this intervention. So you can imagine that some changes happened there.
Wonderful. It's big news. So schools that suddenly start to perform really well. I think that that's something which is you've been very closely associated with. When you recognize that you had a learning issue, one of the things, as I understand it, that you decided to do was actually introduce a whole new level of the gymnasium or junior high school to try to get students better prepared for higher education. So tell us a little bit about first, how did you identify that as being the key problem for scaling up learning? And what have your experiences been, particularly with respect to decentralization of schooling? And Claudia already said that the city is independent, clearly a very decentralized approach in Rio. How important has that been in Poland?
First of all, thank you very much for inviting me here. That's really an honor. I must say the need for improving education came actually from the fact that Poland had to improve as a country, because we are coming, I'm talking about the late 80s, we're coming from the communism. And everybody understood that the jokes are over, we have to meet the challenges of the normal world, which means competition, which means innovation, which means educated people. And we realized facts. One of the facts was that only about 7% of the population of Poland had higher education, whereas the neighboring countries with whom we would compete the strongest had like 40%. So it was immediately clear that we have to do something not to lose talents on the way. In our previous school system, we had an elementary school which was 8 years long, and then the population of kids would split into halves. One half would go just to the basic vocational education, and they would mostly forget what they learned in elementary school. They were just trained to do very simple jobs. And from the other half, the universities would pick at the end like 1/5 to educate further. So it was a very elite system on one hand, but on the other hand, that was not enough for the needs of the today's world. So one way that was devised, one decision was made that you must give better chance to all kids to learn, to take better general education so that make better decisions for the life. So we decided to shorten the elementary school by 2 years and shorten the secondary school by 1 year and squeeze in an intermediate lower secondary school which will extend the general education by 1 year. It's easy to say, but how to do it? First of all, you need teachers, then you need buildings, then you need, the will of the society to accept it. Because everybody knows that education has the most experts, yes, because everybody knows how it should look like, and the privileged way of doing education is do like it was in my young days. Yes, that's the dream of everybody and the source of criticism. So, first of all, we are fortunate in several ways. The first is that we are not a very rich country. That means most of the cost of education goes to salaries of teachers. In richer countries, a bigger share is on the other staff which supports education. Now, we decided to stay within 12 years of education, which means actually we need as many hours of teaching as before. We only restructure. But how to make the teachers to shift then, and of course to move some teachers from elementary schools to this lower secondary schools, and some of this from the upper secondary schools to this lower level. And how to convince parents that some of the schools should be closed because they were too small. That's one of the crucial issues. That was not a financial problem. There were actually two issues to solve. The first one was how to reconcile the micro interest of the country, the macro interest of the country, micro interests of people and of communities. Because in principle people would agree that Poland needs a boost and needs more educated people and so on and so on, but why do you want to change something with my life? Yes, that's a real issue. And there were many situations that, say, a small school in some small village had to be closed because it gets shorter and less kids would attend, and the kids should be bused to some nearby place. And I was not involved in this process directly then. I was just then a professor of mathematics at the university. But then when I became a vice minister of education, I tried to learn how they did it. So I talked to the vice minister who was then responsible for this process, and I talked to her, and she said, well, that was not so difficult. We just counted the protests. If there were less than 300 per day, we are moving on. That's a fact. Now, seriously speaking, it would not be possible to do so if not the determination of the whole society to pick the education road for their kids. I mean, if you make a transition in a political system, then people try to find an orientation how to behave. Okay, there were substantial changes on the horizon. Like in the communist days, unemployment was a forbidden word. I mean, in communism there is no unemployment. Everybody gets a job. Now unemployment was reality, yes, and you have to deal with it, and you have kids. And then there was a decision without any campaign. I mean, there was a decision of an average poll that probably the best I can do for my kids is give them good schooling. So if this opportunity of longer basic education came with the prospect that possibly my kid as the first one in our family will go to study, that really was a boost. So that reduced the protests, which were resolved by the municipalities, like in your country, and I don't believe they could be resolved at the level of any ministry. I mean, you had really to talk to people to convince them and so on, to find sometimes a nearby solution, resign of closing something, do it's somewhere else nearby and so on. It happened. The second issue, the issue of the teachers moving, we were lucky in the sense that more teachers from the elementary school should move up than from the upper secondary move down. So they seem this as a promotion, really, to go to a higher type of school and try to do the best. So again, teachers help to resolve many, many problems which come when you have to organize a new school and then develop a program and so on and so on. We gave a lot of freedom to teachers in organizing the program. Later, we have seen that it was too much. I will tell you in a moment what I mean, but that was really quite enthusiastic process, but made generally on this very basic intuition that we need a change. But 1 year later, in 2000, we got the first results of PISA, which was taken still by the students coming from the old system. And among those students, we identified about 20% of potential analphabets. Kids who know the letters and can put them together but don't understand what they read. So luckily, PISA was timed with our reform. So 3 years later, we got the results from the first graduates from this lower secondary school. And then when you picked from this tested group, the kids who wanted to go to this basic vocational school, then the number of kids who were in the same educational position as those 20% was now reduced to 5%. So they got really a very good chance to improve by installing the school. So that was a very convincing argument, but we didn't have it before we did it. So it came. Now, if you allow me just two sentences about what I mean by overdoing by teachers. You see, this is the second issue that you have to deal when you introduce a structural reform. The system gravitates always towards the previous one. You want it or not, you have to fight so that it keeps on track. So one way of drifting to the old solution was the following. The teachers in the junior high school, on the lower secondary level, treated the school as if it was just the high school. So the previous one. So tried to squeeze too much into the heads of the kids. Just for the good of the kids, of course. But they had the whole population there. So many times it ended in a real disaster, in the sense that the kids would know very well one topic and had nothing about the other, because there's not enough time to cover with the whole cohort very, very advanced stuff. So we have to restructure the curriculum on the state level, and we did it. I believe too late, but we did it. And we used this opportunity to really rethink it and design it in a completely different way than the previous curricula. Namely, we identified First of all, we identified requirements the kids should satisfy ending each level of school, but on a very general level. For example, for mathematics, we didn't say they should know how to solve a system of equations or this or that or that. These are the particularities. We said the whole teaching should be oriented on teaching of reasoning, of strategic thinking, and on modeling. If you have these three basic objectives, then you subordinate the rest toward this. And again, we are lucky in the sense that the first cohort which went through this modified program was taking part in the PISA measurement 2012. And the results in mathematics went up to 25 points. I mean, we really got to the top of Europe with this simple thing, because we convinced the teachers that reasoning and argumentation is not just for the most talented, it's for everyone. This is the basic need. And they were surprised to see that kids learn willingly how to reason instead of learning the algorithms that they have to memorize. This simple switch of program, of course, enforced by national exam, where they had to solve problems, prove that, this or that. Yes, so they had to reason, showed that kids can very well do this. And they could probably do this many years ago if we thought about this. So we have oriented the whole process towards or we have oriented the curriculum around the processes, not around the concepts. And that really helped. And the last sentence, of course, we couldn't forget about teachers. Many people say that new technology makes the teacher obsolete or less important. It's not true. I believe that the basic device that helps to learn, the kids to learn, is the teacher's brain. And all the other devices are only secondary. So again, because of the changing situation, political situation in Poland, of introducing the completely new political system, we understood that there would be many, many opportunities for educated people. So that we were afraid that the best teachers will run away from the job to get to some better paid job. So the teachers got increases. Since 2007 till 2010, every year 10%. So at the end, it was like half of the salary added compared to the before 2007, which kept the best teachers in. And I must say that this is a requirement that a teacher in Poland must have high education. Okay, so these are well-educated people who are now much better paid, and we owe to them this success in PISA, which we got. Thank you.
Thank you. That's fascinating. Just very, very quickly, do I understand from your last comment of the increase in teachers' salaries that one of the consequences of the improvement in PISA scores is that you've actually been able to ramp up your total budget for education quite considerably?
That was really an increase, although not very painful for the state budget, because our demography shows a decline in number of kids. So instead of lowering the budget according to the increasing number of kids, we kept the budget more or less stable and gave more money to teachers.
Okay, thank you. Shannon, you're operating in a very different context where kids are not declining, but the number of kids is really rising very rapidly in Kenya, where you're very active. You've just heard from 3 people from the public sector in education. Mm-hmm. You've got a completely different model. Tell us a little bit about your ability to scale up a private business model, even for low-income children from low-income households in Kenya.
So in many ways, the ability for Bridge to scale up private education for families living below the poverty line is a sign of, well, as Homi said, a child could be in school for 4 years and still be illiterate. In Kenya, more than half of the country fails the national exit exam they take at the end of class 8, which is a high-stakes exam to place them into secondary school. For low-income families, it's more than 70% of their children fail that exam. which means that many families are making a completely reasonable current economic and future investment choice to either not have their children in school or pull them out before they meet class 8, because the costs of attending school, just from either having your child not helping you at home or direct out-of-pocket costs, because unfortunately free primary school isn't actually free in Kenya, nor is it in most countries in sub-Saharan Africa. There's actually a really awesome court case that's happening right now in Kenya, where a group of parents are suing the Republic because fees are being charged for secondary school. And everyone's hoping that they'll add primary school to the case. So this becomes a really dramatic public issue. But because of these circumstances, low-income parents that most people think don't have disposable income, but they do, are already choosing private options when they're available to them. So we've found across 300 communities in Kenya where we've done work that more than 43% of families already send their children to a private school. Most of these schools have no affiliation with the government. They're unknown to the government. But they are a huge partner in actually educating at least 500,000 children today in Kenya. So that's the demand that we see, that it's already existing out there within Kenya. DFID has done lots of other studies across the continent showing that this is not, Kenya is no anomaly. I think it was in 2011, DFID published the study on Lagos State, showing that 1.2 million children already attended private basic education institutions, and there were 12,000 low-cost private schools in Lagos alone. So it's a phenomenon of parents trying to take into their own hands and find a solution for their children, because no one, as a parent, you're desperate to make sure that your child can have a future, that your child would go to school and actually learn how to read, rather than going to school and not having a teacher or not becoming numerate after 4, 6, or 8 years. Seeing that demand, we started Bridge 5 years ago, and we've grown from 1 school in 2009 to 259 preschools and primary schools today across Kenya, in tiny villages of 4,000 people to the big cities like Nairobi, Mombasa, Kisumu. We currently serve 90,000 children, and by next January it should be around 175,000. And it's all financed by our parents. We do have investors who, financing is scary for everyone, for the global, for GPE trying to get their $4 billion. But obviously for us to make the investments that we do in our children's learning and teacher training and publishing and ongoing professional development, it does take a lot of money to radically change what you can do in a school. And we've only been able to do that by amortizing those costs over lots of children. So even today, we're not yet totally self-financed. But so we have long-term investors who are looking to help support this. So that's part of our scaling model, is we have equity investors who are supporting us until we're able to finance our investments through our own cash flow, which should be about another 2 years from now. But all of the capital really does come from our parents, who are paying that, $4.70 to about $7 a month for the education for their children.
Thank you. So as you've been rolling out these schools, tell us a little bit about how you've been able to maintain quality, improve quality. You mentioned that there is demand there, but presumably demand has to depend on the parents believing that you will actually deliver at least as good, if not a better education. So how do you do that and make sure that you can do that even in a small village somewhere as well as in big cities?
Yeah. I actually think it gets easier to deliver quality at scale if you're thoughtful about it, for a few reasons. One is, I don't know if this is not politically correct to say, but I think it's easy to be good at one school. To have one demonstration school or 5 demonstration schools, it's actually really hard to tell what's making those places work. They often get kind of an absurd amount of investment in them, an absurd amount of management attention. And so they're usually just not comparable to what you might be seeing in the public system. And it's really hard to know what lessons you could take from there and then take to either, a school district of 100,000 children or, 500,000 children in a region. And so that's tough. I don't think you can really know what you're doing at that level. And when we were at that level, I was at the schools 5 days a week, and so was all of the staff, which kind of goes to the point about why it's a little bit absurd to then take lessons from those types of places. Once we got to the point where we had 80 schools, and now we have 259 of them, you have to know that what you do works on a systemic basis. You have to know that you've created a teacher training and a teacher monitoring and support system and a continuing professional development system that actually enables teachers to succeed in remote places. And for a private provider, different than a government institution, is once we were able to prove that it wasn't just on paper that there was demand for this type of a provision, that there actually were 30,000 customers and then now 90,000 customers, it's easier to convince funders, to convince investors that we should be able to spend in developing what we have done now, which is a very robust software platform that we deploy over internet-enabled e-readers. So every one of our teachers has a tablet, which is actually more affordable than our previous book publishing costs for our teachers. We actually lowered our per teacher cost by rolling this out. And that device now enables us to not only digitally publish our curriculum literally every day. We publish 7 days, but we update daily. We get our own, every teacher uses it as almost like a factory check-in, check-out card. We also know exactly what pages they've accessed in each one of the lessons each day, how long they spent on it, and we get pupil attendance twice a day and all of our assessments, which gives us, despite having now those incredibly distributed locations, which usually those classrooms, 3,500 classrooms now would be totally opaque, right? You can't be in them, they're far away. But they become transparent. They become data we get twice a day, because we then had enough scale to justify that investment and to prove that there would be essentially enough revenue coming in over time to justify this type of capital expense. And then that lets you do amazing things for your outcomes. Because when you have, again, one little school, you don't know why what's happening is happening, really, and it's hard to test. But we're at the point now where we can do both minute A/B testing on specific curriculum decisions, specific uses of manipulatives, specific changes in a teacher's background, their training, and actually do mini RCTs inside our system. Give 30 schools something different, keep the other 230 another way, and test what happens. And then that's really powerful. Scale, as many people in the room know, once you get to scale, if you actually have either the political will that's been shown here in the public system or the ability to do that in a private system, that's where you can really quickly learn a lot of lessons and then hopefully roll it out across a much larger network.
Thank you. So I think you're the first one to introduce the idea of technology, and that learning is about the learning of the school management business as well as learning of the kids. So Charles, let me come back to you now and say, well, to what extent have you been taking some of these lessons? Is technology making things cheaper? And tell us a little bit about the role of aid and foreign external resources in your programs. Is this just general sort of, block financing, or to what extent does this concept of actually learning about how to make the system better, more efficient, really factor into what donors are doing?
Well, thank you very much. Interestingly, when it gets to the issue of financing, there are quite a number of dynamics that really happen. And from the public side, essentially you're looking at domestic resourcing, and therefore you're looking at government incomes and how those incomes are distributed. In the Ghanaian situation, we have the total share of donor budget in terms of our education budget is about 5%. Now that 5%, while it's very small, is very big because that 5% does the bulk of the work that has to be done. The greater percentage of resources from government goes into paying salaries. And so there's a big yawning gap between the wage bill and then the input side, which is actually what drives education, learning, achievement, and outcomes. Now, because there is that gap, and because after paying that 90%, or government has very little money left to be able to provide enough inputs that are required to ensure that teaching and learning takes place in a very, very efficient and effective manner. And this is where the donors come in. So when you put the question about learning, because donors and us share that desire and vision to ensure that education must necessarily result in learning, both of us are united in terms of where we put our resources. So there's a clear commitment. Donor resources are not used to pay salaries. They would not be used to pay salaries, and we insist that that is not the case. So the real challenge that we have essentially is more of a mismatch, or an unfortunate mismatch in terms of the resource allocation. This has recurred over many years, and recently, in thinking through, some of us are becoming of the view that it's important to begin to do some kind of ring fencing of some resources as a share of the total budget that is set aside solely for the provision of inputs. Because government will always provide money for workers. Again, you're talking about employment. So as many people as are unemployed, they will be paid. But what it takes to do the work for their employment then becomes a real challenge. So in fact, if we don't get results in education, it's simply because there isn't enough allocation of resources on the input side to ensure that teaching and learning really takes place. So that is where we are trying to work at. How much can we set aside, ring fence, and hold constant as long as government continues to recruit staff? And the challenge is that as long as schools come up, teachers will have to be recruited. And so that is an argument that is very difficult to prevent government from doing, but we believe that that will be part of the management side. Yes, because of all of these challenges and resources, the pace of introducing technology has been quite slow and very, very guided. Recently, we are moving at a bit of a faster pace in terms of introducing technology into education, but that has also met a number of challenges in terms of energy. A lot of these technologies require electricity. So many of the villages do not have electricity, and the schools are not all in the cities. In the cities, they don't have a problem. They are already doing it. But in the rural areas, it becomes a real challenge, putting in technology, because yes, you can take a computer there, but it won't work. So that for us is a bit of, and it's also introducing other dynamics in terms of how to address that gap. What alternative sources of energy to introduce into the rural areas, or to look for very efficient technologies or equipment that would still be utilized in those areas.
Thank you. So, Claudia, I mean, picking up on this point about the differences between rural areas and urban areas, Rio, of course, the city, is a relatively rich area in Brazil. So to what extent do you think that your experiences could translate into something that can be scaled up throughout the country? And, if you think it can be, what are you actually doing about trying to broaden your mandate so that it's not just about educating kids in Rio, but kids across Brazil?
Well, we have an issue in Brazil that probably is not only a Brazilian phenomenon, which is you have ununiform quality of teachers. Universities were in the beginning were not responsible for preparing teachers back in the 70s, 80s, and beginning of the 90s. It was a professional, high school level school that prepared teachers. And since the mid-90s, university got that responsibility. And from my point of view, they haven't prepared themselves properly, because they prepare a teacher as if they were preparing a researcher. So they don't work with the skills needed, especially if you talk about primary education, but also with lower high school or gymnasiums. So we decided to do something that might happen in the country, but it would at first help us, which is to prepare a digital platform with digital classes that could be given in any school, in any place, based on our curriculum guidelines. And the most interesting thing that it was not done by, we didn't buy it. We asked our teachers to do it. So it was 400 teachers that were selected. We talked to the ministry, the Federal Ministry of Education. They paid for a course for them to be able to prepare digital classes with the background materials for teachers, a PowerPoint for the teacher on the subject area, on that specific class, some TED Talk-like videos, a quiz to be given if the teacher wants by the end of the class, and things like that. And it was great. It's called Educopedia. It's open resource, so any municipality in the country can use. We have more than 200 municipalities already using it. And the trick is the teacher uses if she or he wants. It's not mandatory. So she can use it as just preparing for the class, or she can deliver the whole class based on that. And that helps also with personalizing education, because kids can attend the classes at home. Because in Brazil, in Rio, 75% of the kids in middle schools have computers at home, even in the favelas. So it is a resource, and if they don't, they access it in school or in other public spaces where computers are available. So it helped with personalizing, with remedial education as well, providing resources for teachers for remedial education and for teachers' preparation for classes.
Thank you. Speaking of, do you also have this idea of trying to develop cost-benefit types of data? You talked a little bit about how when you thought that the curriculum was getting a little bit out of whack, you sort of, you brought it back and then got improvements in results. So obviously the concept of value for money in education is there, but to what extent is it actually formalized? To what extent do you really try to have modeling and small experiments to really continuously try to improve cost efficiency?
That's a very, very important issue. Thank you for this question. Maybe I should start from a very general comment which concerns education investment, because I treat it as an investment. I mean, it's, in my opinion, but not only my opinion, it's a very good investment in two senses. First of all the data shows that educated people pay higher taxes, so we get return on it. And the second is that, again, research shows that they use less social support. So again, it's less cost. So when you balance it, it's great. There's only one problem. The benefits come later than the next election. So of course, politicians talk very willingly about the meaning of education and so on, but they like to postpone this investment. Of course, we try to optimize, but this is done on the municipal level, like in Claudia's case. I mean, for many decades, education in Poland was centralized, and that was really sometimes a disaster. I mean, there's no way you can manage, in Poland it's about 30,000 schools, to manage all the schools from the top. So starting from this, or using the opportunity of the change of the political systems, we decided that the local self-government has to take this. So they get subsidies which are regulated by a certain algorithm, which has quite complicated, about 40 parameters, which take into account how large the population is and how many disabled students and so on and so on. And they get the subsidy, and they can do with it whatever they wish. And in many cases, they add some other money from other incomes that they have. So I know very small, poor communities which spend about 70% of their national yearly income just on education. They are very proud of it. Education is very important for the local communities. The smaller community, the more important the issue is, because everybody has either a child or a grandson in education, so people really care. And the local municipalities try to optimize it, and of course put a pressure on the central government so that they get a bigger share in the whole budget. It's a very difficult issue, especially in Poland, but I think it's in general in all post-communist countries. I mean, for many decades we are thinking that this central budget is like a well without bottom. That because it was artificial money, yes. I mean, there was artificial accounting. You didn't really know how much money the state earned, because everything was regulated by law and by decisions of the Communist Party. Now we have the market, but still we need, I believe, another decade to start understanding the relation of the, say, a general citizen needs more time to understand the relation of the taxes that he pays to what he gets for that. Now, still, we hear quite often that the government should give us more. Yes, but of course, people don't relate it to the other sacrifices that should be taken into account when such decisions are made. So it's a very complicated issue, but as I said, the response to your question is it's visible best on the local level. On the government level, we don't try to mess too much. I mean, if you try to be smart and say how every school in the country should look like, you make only mistakes. So it's better to leave the decisions at the lower level, and of course try to support it. And one way of supporting was this salary raises, which I mentioned before, which really I believe kept the best teachers in the jobs.
Thank you. So, Shannon, let me try to push this idea of the difficulty in getting money when the returns are so long away. You also mentioned that you still need long-term equity investors in your business model, and that you're not quite self-financed yet. So tell us a little bit about in this whole process from startup to the 2 years from now, when you think that your cash flows are actually going to be positive. What's proven to be the most difficult type of finance for you to raise, and how were you able to go about doing that? And once you've come to the positive cash flows, as you expanded to other countries or elsewhere, is that now going to go away because you can all do it as self-financing, or will you again have to face those same obstacles?
Doing any sort of startup is never easy. Doing a education startup where your customer lives below the poverty line of their own country, and like our current customer in Kenya is at $1.24 purchasing power parity per day per capita. So there was at first a great difficulty in even convincing anyone, even people who thought of themselves as impact investors, that these types of families did have income, and getting them to understand the income that these parents do have, what they're currently spending on it, and how much is currently being spent on education today. So extrapolating the studies we've done in Kenya, looking at what parents are currently spending today, either on public education or private, just whatever their out-of-pocket expenses are to educate their children in preschool and primary school per year, we were then able to make the argument that this is a $51 billion a year market that no one really thinks exists, of what parents living below the poverty line are actually spending today in the developing world to educate their children. And I think, while we've been kind of pushing that in amongst investor circles, that probably isn't spoken about much here in Washington, and how much money is actually flowing between families to service providers, whether that's what in Kenya, honestly, are illegal payments to the public schools, or to payments to a private provider within their community. Once we were able to get over that first hurdle, but that took a lot of work. It was actually, in some ways, there was a very happenstance meeting where I ran into Piero Midyar and was able to drag him off to see one of our schools. And he was, a Midyar Network was our first impact investor, and that really changed things for us, because then there's someone who has a track record who's willing to come forward and say, he thinks that this might be something that could work. But then very quickly, what's interesting is if you're trying to do a scaled intervention, and I think in education, much to the credit of what Brookings is trying to talk about here, you can't change an education system or the provision for children if you're doing one school or 5 schools. It's also, I'm really proud to hear that Claudia picked all 155 of them. You've got to go big, or else you're not changing anything. And that scares away a lot of impact investors, because they just don't have that type of capital, right? If you're a group that's only able to, through your own mandate or your endowment, to invest $1 million or $5 million in an entity, that entity probably is not going to be a group that's ever going to reach 1 million children, because the money and the customers just don't match up. And so then the next really tough thing for us was when we were at the point where we'd outgrown impact investment resources, but and so we needed commercial capital. And being able to just show that business model, and to have that long-term vision of that we could get to 500,000 customers, we could get to 1 million customers or children, and being able to prove that over a 2 to 3 year track record. So a really big shift for us was when we were able to get NEA, which is a venture capital firm, has no double bottom line investments. They're just looking for a typical commercial capital outlook. And we're hoping that that starts to set an example for other groups who might want to be interested in how they could do an intervention for families at this income level, getting people to really think that people talk about the bottom of the pyramid a lot, as a customer base, but really thinking through how you could create a service that's truly affordable and have a business model that gets you to enough of them that you can keep your costs that low. But probably our longest term deal was actually with a group here in DC. We finally now have been able to show enough track record that to get a debt deal with OPIC to help us finance our expansion within Kenya. And now that in some ways we are scaled enough that we don't seem silly or that we're going to fall apart tomorrow, I think we're now able to, to both be and to put ourselves forward as a more legitimate partner in education solutions, and to work with groups like OPIC or with DFID or USAID to be part of a complement to government service provision, and to be able to increase access and enrollments, particularly in really difficult to serve areas, and that now we're hoping to open up some of those financing mechanisms.
Great, thank you. So we've got about 25 minutes left. Let me open it up to questions from the floor. If you can introduce yourself as you speak and wait for the microphone. Gentleman there.
Yeah, hi. Steve Cleese, University of Maryland. Two short questions. For Shannon, while public schools in developing countries charge fees, there are efforts to eliminate them, campaigns to eliminate them. On the contrary, private schools charge fees as part of their nature. Isn't that a violation, especially for basic education, of various international covenants, Convention for the Rights of Children, and others? And the question for the panel is, there's been a lot of concern that the emphasis on learning has led to a narrowing of attention to math and reading. How do you protect the broader curriculum that your schools are interested in conveying?
Thank you. There was a question right here.
Thanks. I'm Barbara Bruns from the World Bank. I'm fascinated by your experience, Shannon, and I'm just curious, what drives the economies of scale in your business model? I can see that certain startup investments, like in the curriculum design and the supervision structure and the materials, et cetera, can be amortized over declining marginal costs as you expand the coverage. But and I understand that you have a higher pupil-teacher ratio, and you make that function with the support of the technology, et cetera, and the use of data. But how do you recruit teachers? How does their current salary compare to public sector salaries in Kenya? And can you foresee, as you go to scale, having a declining pool of teacher supply that might force you to raise your salaries over time?
Hello, my name is Uzma Anzar. I'm with the University Research Company. I have a question for you, Shannon. I was wondering if there are local social entrepreneurs who are also partnering with you and have stakes in these private schools, or is it all run by foreign investment?
Okay, why don't we take those? Shannon, quite a few were addressed specifically to you, so why don't you start?
Quickly to Steve, Chris's first question. Sorry. We try to be apolitical and non-ideological, and the reason that Bridge started was because if you're a parent, you don't care about the means by which your child gets educated. You just care that your child does actually learn. And in my own personal life, I did attend public schools across the United States, and I'm incredibly grateful for that. I wouldn't be where I was if I didn't receive a free primary education. But the reality today is that's not possible for millions of children. It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist because illegal fees are being charged, and it doesn't exist because more than 70% of children in low-income families in Kenya, even after sitting in a classroom for 8 years, are failing the national exam. That's a travesty. That should be solved today. I challenge all of you to solve those problems politically and to work on achieving true, free, primary, basic education for all children in the world. I hope that happens. Until it does, I will continue to work with parents directly and hope to serve this generation today. And maybe in 20 or 30 years, Bridge doesn't need to exist, because maybe there really will be free primary education. But for these countries to be able to develop and for these children to have a future, I'm not willing to wait 30 years until that happens. I will work with them today. On our teachers, we have had to perfect a very rapid interview system. So about every 4 months, we interviewed 10,000 people across anywhere between 150 and 300 communities. And we put them through a battery of currently 8 exams. We test all sorts of things with them. And then we put them through a 5-week free-to-them training program, which we suss them throughout the whole process. So we're not worried about our ability to scale our teacher hiring, because we've already been able to create a system that hires teachers from the same community as that our children live in. And that's really important for lots of reasons. They're local role models. They walk with the children to and from school. They're not trying to leave these incredibly tough communities because the job's too hard. Like, that's their life too. And that's really powerful. And it makes the school essentially, somewhat as an answer, but I'll go to it specifically to the third question. Each one of our schools is very much seen as a community school. You know, they're all called Bridge, but in each, you know, slum or village or town that they're in, they're really owned by the parents. I mean, the school doesn't work if the parents don't support the school. All of the teachers walk to school. They're residents of the same community. And that's critical to its functioning. And in many ways, one of the days I knew, like, oh, this is really gonna work, was, you know, there's always local conflict, right? You know, one school loses kids to your school, they try to use a political connection to shut you down or anything else that can happen. And when our parents started like showing up with stones to like defend their school, you know that it's real in that community for those parents. We pay our teachers less than teachers in the civil service. So currently, our teachers get paid about 70 to 75% of what a 1st to 5-year teacher in the civil service earns. But that is an incredibly high salary within the community itself. So compared to other teachers employed inside the communities we serve, we pay between the 90th and the 98th centile of what teachers are actually taking home. So it's very competitive in its own community, but it is certainly lower than a civil service contract. And then the final question related to, are any of these social entrepreneurs themselves? I guess it would depend a little bit how you define that. So we hire academy managers who are like principals or like small business managers for each of our locations. They come from the community itself. They're required to be residential. We put them through a management training program before we employ them. And so in many ways, they are like a community leader from their own area, but they are employed by us.
Thank you. Charles, can you take up this question of whether there's an issue between governments that provide free education, like Ghana, and a private schooling system? You actually have both in Ghana, right?
Yeah, thank you. Well, in Ghana, we do not have a real contest between public and private schools. Because the contest comes up only when we start measuring the issue of learning outcomes, and that continuously becomes a debate rather than a contest. The essence of all of this is that in Ghana we have come to accept that choice is a very critical element in access to education, and so the government encourages individuals. Interestingly, it is in our constitution that an individual can set up a school. So the government encourages private schools to great lengths. And then the government continues to play its part as providing education as a public good and ensuring that it delivers its commitment to education as a public good to the citizenry. So when it comes to the issue of fee paying, government policy is that education is free, and we have what we call a free compulsory universal basic education that mandates all public schools to be free and non-fee paying, which includes the government's readiness to take up issues relating to the provision of all the supporting materials, textbooks, and all other things to ensure that teaching and learning takes place, including the payment of the salaries of all teachers. Interestingly, we have examples of Bridge International Academies mushrooming in Ghana. The challenge that has come up with these institutions is largely a case of wanting to, get support from the government side, because we have a policy where once you are registered as a school in a community and you enroll Ghanaian children, government has a commitment to the children and wants to fulfill that commitment to those children. and the condition is that you have to register with the district education office and get identified as a school that exists in the community. Else, when you get to the point where you have to take examinations, you are likely not to take the examination because you would not be known. So it's not that much of a problem, but we have real challenges when it comes to the quality of education as delivered in some of what is now known as low-cost private schools, because they are set up in environments that are not very conducive for learning. Parents, because they think that public education is not good, rush for some of these institutions, and in the first, second year, they move out. I'm glad that in Kenya it's different. But definitely the future of low-cost private schools is not the kind that most people want to access. But, well, the perception is there that private schools are good, public schools are bad, so parents drive those there and then they come back in the end. But let me touch on what Steve posed the general question, so I want to answer that one too. Steve, did I understand your question to mean that there has been a lowering of attention to maths and reading in schools?
No, I think the reverse, the opposite.
Oh, okay, all right. Yeah, rightly, the foundations of learning is maths and reading. And therefore, if children are not reaching optimal levels in terms of their ability to show that they have acquired knowledge in maths and English, then every other subject become irrelevant. It's clear from all the studies that, well, in Ghana we've done, and in the recent early grade reading and then the National Education Assessment, it's clear that we need to do a lot more in the area of helping our children to improve in mathematics and literacy. And so we've realized that we have no choice. If the children are going to perform better in their education career, we have no choice than to lay a bit of emphasis on maths and English than we have really done in the past. And in our case, we are not even talking about only English. We are talking about literacy, which includes a better understanding of the local languages that are spoken as part of the bridge to improving second language acquisition.
Thank you. Claudia and Zbigniew, I'm going to put the same question to you, but in a slightly broader way. So the question is really a question about testing. And, does testing lead to too narrow a view of education? And I'd like to also relate that to what we've been talking about here, which is scaling up. I mean, on the one hand, testing in all of your stories has been an important ingredient of scaling up. But on the other hand, there is this worry that it might lead to a dumbing down or a narrowing of what a broad education really should be. So if you could just address that trade-off.
Well, thank you for the questions. And while I was listening to what Steve has asked, I was thinking about two approaches to an answer. First is that I fully agree with him that education is not and should not be reduced to language, well, in our case, Portuguese and mathematics. And not only because you don't want to prepare only for the market, but you want to prepare people for life. But also because if you want to work on the on the skills to read and interpret anything that a child reads, a repertoire is demanded. So when you read good literature, or if you read the newspaper, you know to have background information. So history is very important, geography is very important, but also arts are very important for life and for reading and interpretation. So I don't see the tension. Well, the contradiction, not the tension, between testing and having a holistic learning. It depends on the quality of the tests. It depends on how do you view education. In Rio, we view it in a very holistic approach. We introduce arts classes since first grade, which we didn't have. We had only from sixth grade on, and in preschool as well. Because we think that it's important for the kid, and it's also important if you want to widen the kids' repertoire. On perhaps this thing of testing leading to too narrow a view of education. It depends. It depends on. PISA has done a tremendous help to Brazil, showing that we were in a denial state, that we were saying that our education was great in some senses, and they weren't. And if I may talk about private schools, there is also the view that private schools are better than public schools in my country. But when you take PISA and you compare the elite group of participants in the test, that all of them studied in private schools, they perform very badly compared with their peers from other countries. Because of probably of what Dr. Marciniak said, you try to stuck too many content into the kids' heads, into the kids' brain, and you don't develop basic, important skills that they will need for life.
Thank you. Speaking
I agree with Claudia completely concerning the holistic education as the heart of the matter, because we shouldn't forget that the whole knowledge is split into disciplines artificially, more or less, yes, because of specialization of scientists, not because of natural borders between those. So in Poland, we pay a lot of attention not to lose this general picture. So we are one of the few countries, I believe, where we don't have science classes. We have separate chemistry classes, separate biology classes, separate geography classes. These are taught by people who have a master's degree in correspondingly geography, biology, physics, and so on. So we try to keep that. But there's a but to that. Namely, if you want to achieve very good results in all those, you get a very superficial vision of the world. So we took the middle way. I mean, through the lower secondary school, you take all these courses, of course, with a very balanced requirements. We really say what should be learned by the kids. In the upper secondary school, we have still a continuation from 1 year in the same method, but then a kid picks 4 subjects which he or she learns a lot, and the others on much slower rates. But it's balanced, so you cannot say pick mathematics, physics, and computer science. You have also picked some humanistic things. So it should be balanced, but you are obliged to learn seriously some stuff. Seriously means to great extent. Why? Because those kids go then to higher education when there's a big speed of learning, and they have to be able to learn themselves. So this is very important to keep it balanced. And I would like to make a notice about PISA, because it happens that I am responsible for the PISA items in mathematics in OECD. I am the head of this math expert group as my other thing for 10 years now. There's one small detail which you should know, probably not everybody knows. When the kids goes this booklet to solve in PISA, it doesn't say this is this part of mathematics, this is the part of reading, this is the part of science. He just gets problems. So the problem doesn't have a label, it's mathematics. He has to read something and provide an answer. So this problem, even though it's accounted as mathematics, may very well deal with something which is related, say, to calculating dates in history or relating facts, because in this way you also check how the kid reasons, what is the critical thinking. So PISA does not put in these borders between those things. They are quite flexible, exactly for the reason you mentioned in your question, that you shouldn't put stress that these only things are important. And the last point about testing, some people say it's stupid to learn by preparing kids to test. It depends how stupid the test is. If the test is, say, on the test you have just put crosses and guessing is enough to get enough points, of course it's stupid. And then training the kids to put the crosses at the right places is not smart enough. But if you decide that on your test the kids will have to reason, to provide a solution, to design a solution, then preparing for such a test is really forcing the kids to do reasoning, to design solutions and so on. So practicing to this sort of exercise is nothing bad. There's only one condition. This test should not be too often. So in Poland, there's only one test per school. So there's one at the end of elementary school, one at the end of the junior high school, and one at the end of the secondary school, which is at the same time the entrance exam to universities. So these 3 exams, otherwise we don't test kids. They just deal in classroom with different problems. But this exam system is very, very important as a vehicle to transmit new ideas to classrooms. How else could I force the teachers of mathematics to start teaching proofs? There's no other way than saying at the end of the high school they will have to solve at least one problem and they will have to provide a proof. And if they are not able to do so, they will get less points, so they will not get to their privileged university. From that day on, the classroom started to do proofs, and they do it better and better. So there's a good thing in this if you don't exaggerate. I mean, if you don't make it too simple, if you are not scared that some people would fail. Yes, it happened, say, in Czechoslovakia, in Czech Republic, sorry, that was Czech Republic. It happened 2 years ago that almost the government was almost overthrown because 6% of kids failed the national exam in mathematics. Yes, in Poland, 25% fails every year and nothing bad happens. They can take it again. That's the key, yes? They have to learn and take it again. Otherwise, they would go to university without enough preparation. But there's a selection of subjects that you can take. And on equal foot, at the end of the junior high school in Poland, there's an exam in mathematics, as well as exam in philosophy, as an exam in history of art, and so on. You pick the exams you wish, because you make the picks, of course, according to what the university expects you to bring in order to qualify you to begin the study.
Thank you very much. Well, we've reached the end of our time, and I'd like to close this panel with a very quick one-word answers from each of the panelists. Shannon, in 10 years' time, we will have, on scaling up financing, we will have significant long-term private equity investors in education. Yes? No? Zbigniew, in 10 years' time, the case for public resources going into education will be stronger or weaker than it is today?
It has to be stronger, otherwise we lose.
Claudia, involving communities more in education, they will be willing to provide more of their finance or not?
Yes, communities and governments.
Charles, international aid for education. You see a strong case or a weaker case in 10 years' time?
A strong case.
All very optimistic panel members. I think we've solved the problem of scaling up finance for education, so please join me in thanking the panel members.